Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. Glad to have everyone with us this morning. And just want to remind you as you join us, please let us know where you're joining from. It's always interesting to see where folks are coming from in the process. So I appreciate you doing that. And welcome, Rosemary. Long time we haven't seen you. Glad to have you on board. Hope things are well down under, and appreciate you being here. And so, also, those of you that not have not been with us before, love to have you sharing questions and comments with me and our guest. And also, just a reminder how we approach the concept of wisdom. It is a journey, and it involves three steps or three parts to it. And the first one is to gain some knowledge. And so hopefully, we're doing that on a regular basis in our current culture. There is lots of knowledge to be had, and it's pretty easy to come by. Second step in the process is one of gaining understanding and experience. And that's where we start taking this knowledge we've picked up and begin to apply it in life and use it real time and hopefully in a good way. And then the third and most important step in the journey is one of wisdom. And that's something that we generally have to do purposefully. I mean, we can all stumble onto it a little bit if we don't work too hard not to gain wisdom. But the big difference with wisdom is we take our knowledge and our understanding and we're looking at it from a much bigger picture. And in particular, we're looking at it outside of ourselves. And for those of us that have kind of a spiritual bent, what it means for us is that we are trying to see things through God's eyes, see a much bigger picture, so that what we know and understand, we can share not just for our own purposes, but to benefit those around us. So appreciate y'all being here. And it's a real honor today to introduce my friend, Mr. Mack Story. Mack and I started getting to know each other several years ago, and has been a great journey along the way. And I'll let him tell a little more about himself. So, welcome, Atif. Glad to have you with us today. So, Matt, welcome aboard to Wisdom Seeker Live podcast, and glad to have you. Tell the folks a little bit more about yourself and maybe some of your wisdom journey along the way.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with your audience. We're on the same mission. We want to help people have a better life, and that's really my focus: helping people have a better life at work and at home. And I teach principles that apply in both places and with all people, so it doesn't make any difference. I always tell leaders that I'm supporting, it doesn't matter why the people buy in into a principle. If they buy in, they're going to apply it everywhere. It's kind of like gravity. When you learn about it, you know how it works at home, and you know how it works at work in either place. But my background is in manufacturing. My first 10 years of my career started in 1988 is when I started my manufacturing career. First 10 years, I was frontline entry level factory worker, pushing the buttons on the machines, saws, drills, lathes, mills, gear shapers, all that kind of stuff. And then I evolved into programming those machines and doing drafting work and that sort of stuff. And then I kind of, at that time I was taking an engineering path, and then I got into cost estimation engineering, process engineering, lean manufacturing, quality manager, lean manager. And 2008, I started my own business and my own lean manufacturing consulting business. And when I started that, I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a plan. It was the middle of the Great Recession, and everybody was losing their job and all that sort of stuff. And I had to show the world how much wisdom I had and quit my job that I had worked 20 years to get. And that really wasn't the wisdom part. The wisdom part was actually being able to make it happen
Mm,
among with everything going on. But part of that was really having the courage to follow my passion, to find my purpose. And I became successful pretty quickly. It took me about 9 months really to get going, but once I got going, I was booked solid. And within 9 months, my income had increased about 50%. And by 2012, had increased about 300%. So I really wasn't that dumb after all. Although a lot of people told me how dumb I was. And then 2012, I decided to start my own personal growth and leadership development business, speaking and doing on-site corporate training, speak at conferences and all that kind of stuff. So now I'm 10 years into that. You know, you probably know, because this is the wisdom uh, podcast here, Wisdom Seeker. So you probably know this, have heard this, but some people haven't. And I've always heard it takes you about 20 years to become an overnight success. So we're about halfway. I've 10 years later, we're halfway into it. When I say we, I'm talking about my wife, Rhea, RIA, and Rhea Story. And me, the two of us do this together. In 2012, when I gave up my entire income for the second time and started down this path, I was broke for quite a while. And about a year later, she decided she wanted to be broke with me. So she quit her job and joined me. So we went from pretty strong into the six figures to zero, all within a year by choice. And I didn't know it then, but why I was doing it literally was to help people. I didn't know who I was going to help. I didn't know I was going to meet you. I didn't know I was going to be on your podcast, a few years later, and you'd have a podcast, and that we'd write books. Today we have published 32 books. So that's just the high speed version of a 30 plus year career. I'm 52 years old today, so I got a little bit of experience under my belt.
Well, really great, and I hope you picked up on that. Mack has written with his wife 32 books, and I've read a couple of those myself. And tell a little bit about your journey from being a frontline manufacturer technician. I probably used the wrong term, but
it's all right.
It's real interesting for your journey going from making a living to being purposeful. So, and because I've read in the book about it, and we've talked at times. So share with the audience a little bit about that. Welcome, by the way, to Navarra and Paul. Glad to have you all with us today.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear you make an impact when you read out these folks' names, and I'm sure you see a lot more than you're able to say. But it's awesome to help people have a better life. I call it feeding the hungry, and that's what I like to do is feed the hungry people. And so like I said, my first 10 years was entry level, and I always tell people in my 20 years from 1988 to 2008, when I actually worked in manufacturing plants as an employee, I always tell people I should have been fired 100 times, literally. I mean, I tell it from the stage all the time, and people don't believe me, but it's 100% true. I mean, I should have been fired 100 times, but what actually happened was I was never fired once, and I was promoted 14 times in that 20-year career. It's easy to get promoted a lot when you start at the bottom.
and nowhere to go but up, right?
Yep. But it was my character. My character was the reason I should have been fired all those years. But all the companies I worked in, they didn't value character. They valued production. And I was real good at producing. That was how I showed the world I was valuable. It certainly was not my character, except my work ethic. But the rest of me, I had a whole lot of work to do. So it was from 89 to 95. I always said I'd never go to school. I'd never go to college. I hated school. And I always tell people my nickname in high school was 007, not because I was cool like James Bond, but that was my GPA. and that's a joke, but my GPA was really low. I barely did graduate high school. I just didn't care. And then the cool thing, Kevin, and there was a gentleman, 1995. I was working the night shift. It was about 2:00 in the morning. A guy that only met that night for just a few hours. And I've tried to find him later on, but I hadn't been able to locate this guy. I'd love to just thank him and let him know the impact he had on my life, because he was a spark. He was a spark that I needed. And that's what I like to be, is a spark. That's why I drove up, to see you that time. You reached out, and I'm like, hey, I want to talk. want to talk to Kevin. And even though we kind of live in the same city, it was like a 2 hour drive because Atlanta's a big
Yeah.
place. I live on the outskirts on one side, and you live on the
Yeah,
outskirts. I call it local, but to most people, 2 hour drive ain't
that's
local.
right.
And but he come in that night, and first thing he said was he did what I now know to do. He started connecting with me as a person. He just wanted to talk to me. He was a industrial engineer. He was there to do a time study on my work because I was the most productive out of the three shifts. So our plant manager sent him in, and I was still entry level and bottom of the line operator, maybe a couple of levels up from some of the. We had simple machines and we had more complex machines, and by that time I had moved up a couple of levels into machines, but I still was a entry level person. So he comes in and talks to me, connects with me, and then he does the time study, and he's just talking away the whole time and just being a nice guy. His last name was Patel. I can't remember, his first name. I just remember his last name stuck with me. Uh, so he said the plant manager said, if you'd actually go to school, go back and get some education, you could move up. He thinks a lot of you, and that was even a surprise, knowing all the character issues I had up to that point, and still had a lot of them, and I'd have them for many years later. But he was believing in me, but the plant manager had never told me that. But Mr. Patel was passing it along through him, from him to me, and I said, "Nah, man, I ain't ever going back to school. I hated it. It ain't never gonna happen." That's a conversation we had all night. He kept trying to believe in me and pump me up and inspire me, and I kept resisting it. But you know what? The very next, back then we called them quarters instead of semesters. I think they call them today.
Yeah.
But the very next quarter, which was in less than 3 months, obviously, I was enrolled at a community college and started working on my associate's degree in business management, I think it was. And before I got that degree, I just switched it to an associate in science and decided I was going to go get a 4 year degree in business management, which I did. It took me about 6 or 7 years to get my 2 year degree side of it. And then I did a 1 year accelerated program, which was every Saturday for 52 weeks.
Wow.
And we went through, 2 years worth of content in 42 Saturdays or something like that. 40, I
Wow.
forget how many. And so that's when but during that 6, 7 years I was going to school, that's when I really started moving up the ladder, and I started getting into engineering type positions. But I got those positions because of my experience, even though my degree was in business. I just wanted to go get the easiest degree I could get because I needed it to open some doors. Everything says you got to have a 4 year degree, so I went and got the easiest one I could get.
Well, it's interesting, Mac, because work ethic goes a long way to help us get places, even when we, in some cases, can be our own worst enemy. And so good that you had that as a solid foundation. Welcome, Rick and Zaid. Glad to have you. And but yeah, and it's really interesting as we begin to get some idea of purpose that it will drive us to endure 6 to 7 years to get some additional education or whatever. And it makes a huge difference in our lives. And I happen to know also, since we've known each other a while, and read about your journey, that you have developed a great deal of character. And
I'm better now.
appreciate. um, so tell us a little bit about your growth process and that journey towards gaining character.
Yeah, so fast forward from that night in 1995 to fast forward up to 2005. 10 years later, I had worked my way up into those engineering type positions. I had graduated, and actually to make up for my 007, I actually graduated with highest honors in my bachelor's program, almost a 4.0, but I made a C or something in a 1 hour class, and that was it. Everything else was A's. So I'm better in character, and I got better at schooling too. But 2005, I was still in the plants. I was a lean manager over our entire plant, over process improvement and that sort of thing. If people are familiar with lean manufacturing, and I reported to the plant manager, so I had worked my way from the bottom to second from the top relative to our plant, not in our entire company. There's a lot of executive VPs, at headquarters above that, but but I was second in our plant, amongst about 7 or 8 of us reported directly to the plant manager. In 2005, a frontline quality technician who I was kind of friends with, he took my iPod. He said, "Hey man, I want to take your iPod. My friend's got a lot of music on his computer. I'm taking, I load some music on there for you." I said, "Okay." Even in those days, Kevin, I was still out on the shop floor. I was wearing a t-shirt, had gloves and rags hanging out of my pocket in blue jeans. I was always still the frontline guy. You couldn't tell the
Yeah.
difference between me and those folks from what we were wearing, because I was out there. I was getting dirty. I was getting involved in that kind of thing. So anyway, he brings my iPod back, and he said, "Hey man, I put a business book on there for you." I guess because I was in upper management or whatever, he thought I'd be interested in a business book. But I hated reading, and actually I still hate to read. But I figured out today I like to learn more than I hate to read, so I read
There you
every
go.
day. And and I'm gonna get to that part of the reading part here in a moment. But so he gave me that audio. I said, "What?" I said, "What is it?" The audio he had, the business book he called it. I said, "What is it?" He said, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People." I said, "Oh, okay. Is it any good?" He said, "Oh no, I ain't never listened to it." And and he said, "But my friend's dad always talks about it, and he says it's really good. So I thought you'd like to hear it." And he actually didn't ever listen to it or read it until I wrote my first book, and I dedicated in the I acknowledged him in the beginning of it, in the front of the book, about the impact he had by giving me that audio. Because up to that point, I was 17 years into my career, and I always tell people, actually, even up to the 20 years when I resigned, 3 years later, I resigned to start my own business in 2008. I had worked for multi-billion-dollar global organizations, and never once in that 20 years did any single leader at any level, anywhere, anytime invest one penny or 1 minute introducing me to personal growth and leadership development content. Nobody had ever said, "Hey, I read this book. You need to read this book," or "I listened to this audio." Nobody. It's like didn't exist. And so, you know, I gotta let you down on the wisdom seeker, but 2005 he gave me that audio, but I didn't listen to it to 2008.
Well,
I, I,
some of us are a little slower in getting into it than others. It's
yeah,
all right.
I was a slow learner, so I forgot about it. 2008, I resigned, started my own company, as I mentioned, and I'm driving around looking for clients because I didn't have any. I didn't have any business, and I remembered. Actually, I didn't remember. I was just riding around listening to music. Had my iPod plugged in, and when you got it plugged in across the stereo, it'd tell you what's playing. So music's playing. I'm driving around. All of a sudden, a guy started talking. I'm like, what is that? It kind of was just weird. And I
Yeah.
looked at because there's no music, just a guy talking out of the blue. I looked at the
Yeah.
screen. It said 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I said, "Oh, that's that business book Zach gave me." I said, I'm trying to start my own business. I don't have any. Maybe I ought to listen to it. And so
Might be a
I
good time, huh?
might be a good time. And it was a good time. And, I let it play. And, I can tell your audience today, I didn't know at that time. I didn't know there was a book. I didn't know there was an industry. I didn't know there was anything beyond that 1 hour audio. I had a highlight version. I didn't even have the whole book. I just had a highlight version, but it had all the nuggets, right? All
There
the
you go.
all the best nuggets that Dr. Covey, Stephen R. Covey had put in that book, and so I let it play. And if you don't mind, Kevin, I want to roll into the greatest lesson I ever learned, since we're
Of
talking about
course.
wisdom.
Sure.
And so I let it play, and within just a couple of minutes, because again I had the 1 hour audio version. The whole book's probably 12 or 13 hours, but I didn't know all that then. I do now. Within a few minutes, he got to talking about habit one, to be proactive. And pretty quick, he said one thing I missed, but I'll get back to that one. I missed that at first, but I got to the thing that's the most important lesson I ever learned. And he teaches in there, between stimulus and response, human beings have the freedom to pause in between
Mm-hmm.
and choose their response. And when he said that, I literally hit pause on the audio, because it got my attention. I was listening to it intently because I didn't have any business and I needed some business. And so he said, between stimulus and response, human beings have the freedom to pause and choose their response. And I hit pause, and because I was thinking, this joker doesn't know me. Whoever he is, he doesn't know me. I didn't know I had a pause button. Something happens, I go
Mm-hmm.
crazy about that quick. You see that
Yeah.
no space there. I didn't know there was supposed to be a space, or I could create a space.
There you go.
I had a short temper. I used to tell everybody, uh, short temper runs in my family, and all you got to do is hang around us, and we provide the evidence to support the belief.
There you go.
And I was one of the worst. I mean, but I listened to it, and I hit play again, and he said it again, and I hit pause again, and I thought about it again. I rewound it. I did that 2 or 3 times, play, rewind, because it was like, then I wouldn't have used the word profound, but today I know that's what it was profound to me. I didn't
Right.
realize it. It seems so simple to say it today. It's like, it's so simple that I don't want to say it most of the
Yeah.
time. But I know
Right.
there's so many people like me who'd never heard it. So I
Mm-hmm.
still need to say it. A lot of people say, the stuff you say, it's nothing new. And it is nothing new. It's been around since the beginning of time. And you talked about being a person of faith. If we're a person of faith, then we know where the source is. And it's been around since the beginning. And
Yeah.
so what I tell people is no, nothing I teach is new. The stories I tell are new. You probably hadn't heard my stories because nobody's had them but me. I said, but the principles, they've been around since the beginning of time. But the reason we got to keep telling them over and over is because somebody new is being born today and they never heard this stuff,
That's right.
and they're growing up. So I thought about that, and I let it play, and pretty once I let it play, he taught another thing. He says, you know, being responsible, being able to choose our response means we're response able.
Mm.
And I could see him. I was listening, so I couldn't see me like the audience can see me, but I saw him doing his hands like that. In my mind, it means we're response able. And then he says, what that means is we're responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And soon as he says being response able means we're responsible, it made perfect sense to me. And in that moment, I realized short temper didn't run in my family. Irresponsibility ran in my family, and
Okay.
it still
Well,
does through most of it, but it doesn't through me anymore.
well, that's really great. And like I said, I knew from us talking and having heard your story through your books that you had grown in character. And I also have picked up that you are a very voracious learner. How you learn may not be through schools traditionally as such, but uh, even in the beginning when you first started your work, you were trying to learn everything you could
All the
to
time.
be better at it. And there's a lot of value in that. Need to welcome Dr. Shama. Glad to have you, Dr. Shama, and Sina. Glad to have you. And Suzette, glad to have you. Been a while. Glad to see you back. And but yeah, it's really interesting. The two things you share are such key and core principles of character, and which you have also come to learn and write about, is those are two key characteristics of being an effective leader. I one of the things I share all the time is if you're going to be a leader, especially a servant leader, there's three things: responsibility, acceptance of who and what you are and what's going on around you, and in humility. And one of the byproducts of the humility piece is learning to put the pause in there. I heard a pastor recently talking about measured response.
Mm-hmm.
And, the wisdom in using measured responses is remarkable. I continue to practice on the pause myself because sometimes things happen and I open my mouth and say something stupid, and hopefully it doesn't lead to stupid actions, but even then, you know how that goes. But hitting that pause button is just so important, and learning that principle and applying it. I mean,
Yeah.
we can learn stuff all day long, and if we don't do anything with it, it's not much good to us.
Yeah.
But that's such a key thing. And then taking responsibility. I'm actually teaching a leadership class right now. I do a 10-week leadership class, and I keep every class. I remind these leaders, being a leader is not for those that are faint of heart. if you take responsibility as a leader should, it's really, really quite challenging. Now, I
Yeah.
always remind them, if you're a good leader and you apply those principles as a leader, along with that great responsibilities, a lot of blessings, because you begin to impact people's lives, as you mentioned before. And that's something we share and really key in on, and it drives us, that we are here just to take our life, our story, and help others based on where we're from, which is kind of interesting. Another principle, I'm the same as you. What I share is nothing new. It's very tried and true, been around for thousands of years,
Yep.
and the principles are great. And when we can learn them and apply them, it's amazing. And the beauty is that each of us have our own version of how that happens, because there are other people that can identify with us and hear hear the story and relate, and therefore actually go beyond just hearing the words. So
Yep.
um, let's see. Rosemary shares a comment. She says that information that is not implemented is true ignorance. Boy, that's a mouthful. Thanks, Rosemary. Yes, we have a lot of opportunity to learn lots of things, and then we don't do anything with it. Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Covey, something else I learned from him, and real quick on humility before I talk about that is, I forgot to say it at the beginning. We travel all over the country and outside of the country sometimes speaking, and we've been traveling, in as many as 40 states in a single year speaking. So one thing I always tell people from a humility standpoint, right up front, is I'm bilingual. I forgot to tell your audience that I'm bilingual, and a lot of people think that that means I speak English and Spanish, but that's not it. I speak English and country, and and God bless me, I speak country better than I speak English. So everybody has to forgive me. I usually say that at the beginning, so I forgot to mention it to your audience. So I want them to let them know I know how I talk, but I'm okay with it, and everybody that I influence seems to be okay with it, and I'm not changing. But talking about that, I remember reading in a book from Covey, probably it's the Seven Habits. I read a lot of Covey's books. I hate to read, but I've been reading literally every day since 2008. Since I hit play on that audio, it impacted my life in such an amazing way. I've been reading every day, or watching videos, or listening to audios, mainly reading though,
Mhm.
every day. Now that's 14 years, and
Yeah,
and but one of the things he said is to know and not do is not to know. It's,
yeah,
it's, it's the comment that was made just a moment ago. And to understand and not apply is not to understand. And
yeah.
and
That's
and it, and
and it's the truest form of what Rosemary said, and it's ignorance, and
yep,
that comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors, without a doubt. And Rosemary goes on to make follow up comments. She says, hence the measured response, the pause, the spaces in between open up the ability to understand. Yeah, that's the value of the pause. We get additional understanding before we say something stupid or do something stupid, if we do it right. Now, there's still some people that pause and still put their foot in their mouth.
yeah, they pause and trying to figure out how to do that instead of how to actually listen. And
That's
that's
right.
habit. What Rosemary just mentioned is that it's habit 5 of the 7 habits: to seek first to understand, then be understood. It's exactly what she was just saying. And you know uh, when I discovered this stuff, when I say this stuff, I mean personal growth and leadership development. It was not actually a business book in my terms. It was a personal growth
Mm-hmm.
and leadership development book, is what the 7 Habits is. And, that was in 2008. At that time, my son was 17, and he basically had hated me since he was 15. And he kept hating me until he was 19. So there was a 4-year stretch in there where he really hated me. He didn't have anything to do with me unless he had to have something to do with me. But when he was 17 is when I discovered this content, and I did what a lot of people don't do, is I didn't look out the window and start blaming everybody else and start reading this stuff trying to figure out how everybody else was doing the wrong stuff. At least I got that part right. Is I started looking in the mirror. I noticed other people were not living this stuff too. But I wasn't worried about them. I was worried about me. And so I started focusing on me. And like I said, I dove right into it, started growing, started teaching it to my lean manufacturing, the Kaizen event, the process improvement teams I was leading. I had a new one every week. I started instantly teaching them. And that was that first point I learned from that audio that I missed the first time. But the second time I listened to it, I grabbed it. And what he said almost immediately when he introduced that topic was, if you truly want to learn this content, you got to start teaching it to other people. And I was learning and applying, and so I did. I started teaching it to all the teams that I had each week. Whatever I was reading, I was teaching and sharing. When I had success, I would tell them, or when I failed, I'd say, I know better now, but I did it wrong anyway. But fast forward from 2008 to 2010, and my son reached out to me, and my mom had been telling him, you need to give your dad another chance. You need to give him another chance. He's changing. And after I started changing so much, my mom started reading these books. She wanted to know what was I reading that was causing me to change. So then mom started getting better too. But she also was learning what I was learning. So she was able to tell him, she was loaning me her influence through my son that, hey, your dad's getting better. Your dad's getting better. You need to give him another chance. And, it took 2 years but he did give me another chance. And because of habit 5, I had been talking about it and reading about it, teaching it, seek first to understand, be understood, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And when he called me that day, I remember I was in Texas on a consulting trip. I was in the hotel. He called me that night, and I got it right. We hadn't really talked for 4 years, and I didn't try to tell him a lot of stuff. I didn't try to give him advice. I didn't ask him questions. I just listened. And when I was speaking to make sure he understood me. And I told him, that I understood him. And I told him, I said, hey, I ain't going to agree with you or disagree with you. I ain't even trying to do that. I'm just trying to understand. So everything you hear me saying tonight, I was declaring my intent, which was another principle I had learned. So I wanted him to know, I'm trying to repeat what you say. I'm trying to reflect your feelings. All these, I was teaching him what I was actually doing so he could understand. Hey, I was saying, hey, bud, I'm just trying to understand you. I hadn't talked to you really in 4 years. So if I say something out of line, I may get it wrong. I ain't an expert, probably never will be. And I tell your audience, that's the hardest principle I've ever learned. And it's still the hardest to apply. Is to seek first to understand. But I got it right. He talked to me for 2 hours, and then his birthday was coming up, and he wanted some, I said, what you want, man? I want to get you something. I ain't got to really be around you much. And he said he wanted some new cowboy boots. And so I leveraged my influence to maximize my influence and found a cool boot store that was an hour away. So I had him trapped in the car for an hour and 2 hours both ways.
Yeah.
So as we were talking, I said, hey, man, if you don't mind, I'd like to share this audio that really changed me. Just see what you think about it. So I was trying to help him, right? And so I hit play on the audio, and then we had like amazing conversation. It hit him the same way as it hit me. So then we were both working on getting better, and our relationship launched like a rocket. And he actually started working with me as a lean manufacturing consultant at 19 with 0 experience.
Nice.
And he slayed the dragon because I gave him a list of books. I said, read this book, read that book. You learn this stuff, I can put everything you need to know about lean on a PowerPoint. Because what you need to transfer this information to the people and let the people improve the process. All you got to do is lead. You don't have to know nothing about it if you're leading. If you're trying to manage and direct, you got to know everything about it. But you ain't trying to do that. And he got it, and he did an amazing job.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Rosemary picked up on your bilingual comment. Says she's trilingual. She speaks English and injured worker and workers' comp. And it's interesting that she says that, because that's what makes us unique, is that in our own way, we speak multilingual. It's some known language, but the other part is that language we've developed as we grow, and that there are people out there that need to hear that other language from us, because there's a principle out of the Bible says that we're supposed to comfort those with the comfort we've received, and that's just a Bible way of saying we learn, we grow, we fall, we make mistakes. And when we're willing, we can help others as they go through their journey. And that's where our bilingual or multilingual foundation comes in, is helpful,
Yeah.
because we're going to speak a language of our experience that not everybody will get, but those that get it, like your son, it becomes very impactful. And really, that's what much of life is really about for all of us. We are very unique, but we have common design, and one of our common designs is to help others from our experience, where we've grown and learned.
Yeah.
And whether you realize it or not, you picked up on a teaching principle. I'm a certified teacher and know all the pedagogy lingo and all that. But the fact that you started teaching what you were learning means that you retained much more, and it became more real and more applicable than if you just read it and took it on board and practice using it.
Yes.
And it's a powerful principle. I tell people, if you want to learn something, doesn't matter if you know it yet, try to teach it. And
Absolutely. That's how
you
you learn
learn
it, right? Teach it and you learn it. And you
it.
also, if it's character based, you're more likely to start living it, because if
Yeah,
you're teaching it, you may not get it right, but you want to try to represent what you're teaching if you're going through the effort to teach it. Most people do,
yeah,
unless they're trying to manipulate someone, which
right.
is the opposite of good character.
That's right. And for me, one character that I need and got to learn a lot by applying that principle is humility, because I'm trying to teach somebody else and fall flat on my face and go, okay,
Yeah.
I haven't arrived.
Yeah. Kevin, one time Rhea and I, we actually still have been supporting the prison fellowship,
Okay.
something called Wardens Exchange. And each year, a lot of wardens all over the country, prison wardens, go through this transformational program, and it's usually a 9-month program. We speak at it. Sometimes we speak in person. Sometimes we do it by video, and
Hmm.
it's all about transforming the culture, but how they lead and how they even lead the prison population. How they treat them like people, and that sort of thing. And we were speaking in Petaluma, California, and we got to meet prison warden Burl Kane. He's retired now, but he was there speaking also. And we toured San Quentin prison, and when we were in the chapel at the prison, he actually sat down right beside me, and I got to talk to him and kind of got to meet him more. So we got to talk. But he was the former prison warden at Angola, Louisiana State Penitentiary. At the
Oh,
time he took
wow.
it over, it was the bloodiest prison in the nation was his nickname. And people who watch Animal Planet or whatever, they might have seen the rodeos. He had rodeos out there. But anyway, he really turned around that prison. But he's got a line that I quote him from, and he says, "Be humble so you don't stumble."
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a good, simple little line, but it's full of truth. I teach and write that there's a fine line between uh, arrogance and confidence, and
Yes.
it's called humility. And
Yes.
that's really the only thing that changes you from arrogant to confident. If you actually have some knowledge and you're actually good at what you do, the only thing that's going to make you to move from arrogant to confident is humility. If you
Yeah.
don't have humility and you know a lot of stuff, you're going to come across and probably literally be arrogant. If you have humility, you're just going to be like a regular old guy or a gal, and you're going to be able to connect to anybody. People are
There
going
you
to
go.
want to follow you if you're humble, no matter how much you know.
Yeah. Back to the bilingual comment. Suzette really liked your comment. Says that bilingual is critical, especially in one-to-many messaging. And so, yeah. And welcome, Lee. Glad to have you. And Mary, glad to have you as well. And then Zaid makes a comment, says your experience and life story should be shared more and more. Thank you for this episode. And by the way, got to put a plug in because I've read a couple of Mack's books. One of the ones that I've read is Blue Collar Leadership. That's kind of your anchor or flagship book, right?
Yeah, that was my first book. I've got 6 books in the Blue Collar Leadership series. I've actually got 14 books, and then my wife's got the others, but we got 32. We've written one together, and so I really do focus in the blue collar space. We speak. I mean, it's crazy, but we were invited in 2018 to speak at Yale University about blue collar leadership, which who would ever thought about that? But you know, follow your passion, find your purpose, and the good Lord, if you're a person of faith, takes care of the rest. If you're not a person of faith, He still does.
Gracious anyway, right?
Yep. And so that was my first book, though, Blue Collar Leadership, Leading
Mm,
from the Front Lines, and I wrote it literally for the entry level blue collar worker. Doesn't matter what industry they're in, but a lot of people read that book and they think it's, you know, for a boss. It is for a boss, but I wrote it for the entry level blue collar worker. You know, someone who has no one reporting to them, and really, it's a book on how to lead yourself well, how to become very successful as an individual worker. And you know, I've got other books to take you beyond that, but that's the foundational book. You know, my passion is leadership development, but I teach that personal growth is the foundation of leadership development. When we talk about servant leadership, or I use the term high impact leadership, everybody understands what I mean when I say high impact leadership. You
mm,
know, if we say servant leadership, some people got to define it. And,
yeah.
you know, I define it as high impact leadership. And
Hmm.
then I talk about managers of people really are low impact leaders. They're still leaders, they have influence, but they're low impact. And so people with a lot of influence are high impact leaders. So in that book, it's full of principles on how to lead yourself well. But anyone who's led a team before, or worked even on a team, has seen someone can do a phenomenal job by themselves.
Yep.
They may have the character to do a good job by themselves. They may be the best on your team. I mean, I used to be the best on my team when I had terrible character,
Yeah.
but I had enough character and development to do a good job by myself. My problem was, as soon as I had to work with someone else, I had a whole lot of other issues that came up because I had to deal with them and who they were and their character, and my lack of character of being maybe insecure of they're going to get promoted before I do, and all that sort of stuff. But that book you mentioned, Blue Collar Leadership, Leading from the Front Lines, I had a CEO of 5,000 people read that book and call me. I didn't know him at the time. He's a client now and has been for about 4 years. But he read that book first time he read it. He called me the next day or messaged me on LinkedIn actually, and told me how much he got out of it. Even though, you know, I wrote it for the entry level person, and here's a CEO who's very humble reading a book for the entry level people, taking notes. And he said I took your book and gave it to my 16-year-old daughter, who probably won't ever be a blue collar worker, but I told her, you got to read this book. And you know, he got so much, he took it straight to his family and started sharing it. He's bought thousands of books from us now, you know, and had us speak multiple times to his team. But but I got another book called Blue Collar Leadership and Teamwork: 30 Traits of High Impact Players. When you stack, you got to become a high impact individual first,
Yeah.
and then you need that book second, because now it's full of 30 chapters. Most of my books are 30 chapters, 3 pages each, so they're easy to read. They're easy for leaders to use for book studies and things like that. And so that second book is really how to become a high impact team player. Once you're a high impact individual, this second book, the teamwork book, is full of 30 chapters. They all start with the word be. The first chapter is be growth oriented, right? Because that's what you got to be, humble right on the front end to be a high impact team player. And that's why be growth oriented is the first chapter in the book. But it's got
Yeah.
chapters, you know, like be responsible, be intentional, be present, you know, be all of these things that a person needs to be in order to make themselves and the most people the most valuable. There's a quote from Peyton Manning that I love. I think it's on the back cover of that book, and Peyton Manning said the most valuable player on the team is the person who makes the most players valuable.
Mm,
It ain't about the individual; it's about the person who can help the most people be the best. And it's not about being the best. I mean, you are the best if you do that, but the way I say that in my simple terms is leadership's not about me, but it starts with me.
yeah.
Just like me and you today, we're not here for us, but if we didn't work on us, we wouldn't be here for everyone else.
There
And
you
it's
go.
and
We have to have walked through some of this to be able to help others walk through it. And one of the principles that you've mentioned is the principle of we have to, if we're going to be a leader, and we should all be a leader at a minimum of ourselves. And that's where we start. And then I know in the last couple of years, something dawned on me that, I'm very big on servant leadership, but I wasn't good at applying the principles of servant leadership in leading myself.
Mm.
And it dawned on me, one of those moments you go, oh, wow. Um, and it came to my mind that I needed to use those same principles in dealing with me. And it was pretty insightful and impactful as I began to learn that, because I used to talk about being my own worst boss. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm teaching people how to be good leaders instead of bad bosses. And I'm not applying those principles in leading myself. So, got to back up a little bit. Mary has a comment. She says, I like the idea of helping others through our own experience. God bless you, Kevin and Mack Story. You both are appreciated. I waited to comment on something that I deeply feel is so important to our good health. And just so you know, Mary walks the walk. She helps lots and lots of people in her day-to-day life. And the impact of helping others and how that's a common thing we share, regardless of where we come from,
Yep.
because the others we can affect. And Rosemary, I understand Rosemary's from Australia.
Okay.
And so when podcast starts, it's already 11 o'clock at night where she is.
Oh,
So
wow. She's
she's
dedicated.
been,
She's intentional.
yes, she's been very intentional and supportive, and I really appreciate Rosemary. And then let's see, Lee makes comment, is kind of ironic when teachers of business ethics get arrested for white collar crimes. Indeed, indeed. It goes to Mac's comment about character. We can have all the education, we can have all the knowledge in the world, but without the character to support it, we have a whole nother set of problems.
Yeah.
Uh, and by the way, as you get Mac's Blue Collar Leadership book, it's really a very open and honest accounting, and you learn about Mac's journey, and he's very transparent with it. And I can't recommend it enough. I like it enough that I went through a military leadership class that as part of being in the State Guard, and we got to pick a book on leadership, and I used Blue Collar Leadership
Wow.
as my
Thank
book.
you. That's awesome.
Yeah. And welcome, Eunice. Glad to have you with us. Eunice is a regular, and she makes a comment, leading by example is the best. Indeed, a real leader doesn't depend on authority. Plus, unfortunately, in our culture, the idea of authority is kind of gone away. So real leadership has to be by example. That's the power of a high impact leader. Is a high impact leader knows that the best way to influence and bring people along is very little to do with telling them what to do, but showing them how to do it and how to be.
Yep. Can I say
Another,
something on that, Kevin?
of course, jump in there.
My son, rebuilding that relationship was powerful for a lot of reasons. And one thing, just to mention him later, after I stopped, in 2012, I stopped doing lean manufacturing consulting, went doing what I'm doing now. And
Mm-hmm.
so he had to go find his way. He's actually, he's about to be 31. He's on his fourth career. He has no college. He's been making six figures since he was 19 with no college, but he's highly educated.
Yeah.
Right? Self-educated, but he was in a school one time selling Roth IRAs or something like that to the teachers, one of the jobs he had. And he sent me a picture of a quote on the wall, and actually he didn't know it. He just thought it was cool, thought I'd like it. But it's actually my favorite quote of all time, but not because he sent it to me. It's awesome that he sent it to me because
Yeah.
that connection, but it's the words that makes it my favorite all time. And it's from Abraham Maslow, and he says, if we're not modeling what we're teaching something else.
Mm.
And then I kind of turned it around and made my own quote and thought out of it, because thought provoking quotes provoke thought, right? And
Yeah.
so what I always say is, if you're not modeling, you're always teaching what you're modeling, regardless of what you're teaching. That's the way I say it, because what you're teaching, that's what's coming out of your mouth. But
Yep.
what you're modeling is what's coming out of your life, and that's the thing that matters is who we are, not who we say we are or who we pretend to be or who we wish we were. Who we are is what matters. And another quote from a guy named Michael Josephson. I always start out my talks when we speak on this because I'm always talking about character. And
Mm.
so a lot of people are going to think I'm blaming them, and I try to tell them I'm not. They may look in the mirror and start to see some things, but I tell them I don't know what's in your mirror, and please don't blame me for it because I didn't have anything to do with it. I don't even know you a lot of times. But the quote from Michael Josephson is so powerful. Is we don't have to be sick to get better.
Mm.
And I say that up front, and I say it throughout my talk because I don't want people to start thinking I'm blaming them. But we
Right.
don't have to be sick to get better. The top athlete in any sport, anywhere in the world today, the number one athlete, I guarantee you they working today to get better, and they already number one. And if they
Yeah.
ain't working to get better, number 2 and 3 is working to get better, and they're gonna take that number one spot. So all of us, it's why I read every day. I'm gonna read every day the rest of my life. Is I don't have to be sick to get better. All I have to do is have a desire and act on that desire.
Yeah. Key characteristic of a real leader is they're always looking to grow. They realize they don't never arrive. We get better, but we never arrive. So we're always looking for new ways to grow and learn. No doubt. Have to chuckle. Lee makes a comment. Says each chapter is 3 pages long. Are you saying leaders have a short attention span?
Hey, that's true, Lee. Some people ask me, Mac, why you write? My first book was Defining Influence. Increasing your influence increases your options. It was about 250, 300 pages. Very first comment I got on that book, I thought there was nothing in that book. It's so small. To me, it's so small of a book. And first comment I got was, it's too long. It's too big. So I listened to the voice of my customer. My second book, 10 Values of High Impact Leaders, it was 125 pages. And then my third book was Blue Collar Leadership, Leading from the Front Lines. And that's when I honed it down and made it 90 pages. 90 pages, 3 chapters per page. And people say, why you write such little books? I say, because I want people to read them. And it's
Yeah.
still funny, Kevin. People come to our book stand when we're speaking. Hardly ever do they buy the Defining Influence book because it's thick.
Yeah.
But they'll buy 10 of these little books, 90 pages, because my wife's, a lot of her books are 30 chapters, 3 pages too. They'll buy a stack of these that are like this thick, but they won't buy one that's this thick.
Right. Yeah.
And it's
Well,
just,
I mean, the it makes me think that sometimes we try to overcome our inability to communicate efficiently and effectively by just using a lot of words. And the reality is, most of the profound information we get is usually very short and succinct. And
yep.
so, yeah,
Keep,
definitely.
keeping it simple.
There you go. Suzette makes a comment that continuous self-reflection is key in any form of or level of leadership. So important. And that's what you mentioned, intentionality. Part of our intentionality is reflecting regularly. And one of the first things when I started Wisdom Seeker Live is I told people on a regular basis, you've got to take 3 steps in order to grow and gain wisdom. 1, disconnect from the distractions, whatever those are. And for many of us, I still maintain the biggest distraction is news media and people's opinions that we don't need to hear. Second
Yep.
thing we do is observe. We got to look inwardly, we got to look outwardly. And then the third step is, based on what we observe, find the wisdom in it. And if we do that regularly, the impact on our own life will be remarkable. And as a result, we can impact the lives of others equally as remarkably. Welcome, Richard. Glad to have you with us today. Let's see. ATIF has a question here, Mac. How can we move from state of knowing to state of being? Bridging knowing doing gap is a Herculean task at personal level and organizational level. How to bridge that gap? Okay. He dove deep on you there, Mac.
Yeah, and I always say, I define discipline as giving yourself a command and following through on it. And
Okay, I like it.
and discipline, if you want to close that gap, discipline is a bridge you got to cross every day. And
Yes.
the thing about all these principles is most of them won't work by themselves. To have discipline, you got to have a whole lot of other things that's going to cause
Mm,
you to be able to execute on discipline. But the biggest thing is you got to value it. Whatever it is you're trying to do, you got to value it. It's one reason a lot of people, a lot of leaders, bosses can't get their teams to buy into them and their vision, or is that the people are not bought into them and the
mm,
vision. As soon as they get the right, they communicate and teach and educate on their vision, it's easy to get the people to move from knowing to doing. So you gotta define who you are and what you value, because most people, they're doing something, and they're doing what they want to do. And
right.
so I say, when it comes to leadership development, character development equals leadership development. So one, there's this old saying that says you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I agree with that. But you can pour some salt on his tongue, make him thirsty, and then
Yeah.
he'll choose to drink, right? So when you talk about how you move from knowing to doing, and just like, I talk a lot about workforce development, and you got to introduce people to this stuff, just like me. I hadn't even been introduced to it. So the first thing you got to do is introduce somebody to the new principle. But
Hmm.
still, that's not going to make them start doing it. They got to value it. So a lot of times you got to teach them more stuff, and you got to figure out what do I need to hear to cause me to buy in, or what's my team need to hear to cause them to buy in. That's why I read every day, because
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of stuff that I know that I'm still not doing. And so
Yeah.
I'm trying to feed myself. Again, I call it feeding the hungry. I got my podcast is Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. A leader who heard me speak in Missouri told a frontline worker, he actually drives a trash truck. And I'm going to make this quick, Kevin. I know we get short on time, but he drives a trash truck for a city government. And that boss told that guy, he said, "Hey, I think if you listen to this podcast, it's going to help you. You got a lot of potential." And that guy hadn't he needed to be doing a lot of stuff he wasn't doing, but because the boss introduced him, he actually started listening to my podcast while he's driving the truck. This was only like 6 weeks or so ago. I've spoken to him twice now. I talked to him Friday night for 3 hours. The,
Mm.
the guy is gung ho. He started doing book studies with his kids. He's listened to nearly 150 episodes of my podcast. I got 270, so he's about halfway there. And,
Okay.
but he's driving down to that free conference I was telling you about on the
Yeah.
warm up call. He's driving 10 hours to be there on April the 1st. He's never done anything like this. All he needed was a spark. And he's an example of a person like me. All I needed was a spark.
Right.
And that's why I'm glad to be on your podcast today, because hopefully between you and me and your audience, maybe we providing somebody a spark that all they need is an introduction, and they'll do the rest.
Yes.
But the key to
Spark.
that question is discipline.
There you go.
No discipline, no results.
There you go. Richard shares a quote. It says, "If you're not willing to learn, no one can help you. If you're willing to learn, no one can stop you." Great quote. All right, we've got couple of minutes here, and Eunice asks a good question, one that needs to be addressed in a lot of fronts. And what do you think about derailed leadership?
Yeah, I think our world is suffering from leadership malpractice. There's a lot
Mm,
of derailed leadership, and if you're suffering from that above, most of the time, either way, we got to grow and develop ourselves. We got to increase our influence. We can't go tell the leader to be better. We might be able to influence them to be better. I've got clients, and I've got people who were entry level people who started influencing their leadership, like the young guy I mentioned a minute ago. He's actually in his 40s, I believe, but the one driving the trash truck. He's gotten so gung ho. He told me the other day he was picking up trash in the lot when he got back from his route. He saw the lot was trashy, so he started picking up the trash. And he said, I knew if they were going to tell us to do it at some point. He said, but I was being proactive, and I decided I'm just going to pick up the trash. He said, and a couple of drivers drove by and made fun of him, want to know what he was doing. He said, it's a nice day. I'm going to pick up the trash, and he's cleaning up. He said, by the time he got done, though, two supervisors were out there with him picking up
yeah.
the trash. And then he had to leave at 2 o'clock. He got off of work, and they were not finished. And the supervisor says, Don't worry about it, Josh. He said, we'll finish cleaning this up after you leave. But really, you got to influence yourself and hope you can influence the leaders. And if you can't, you got to fire the leaders and find a new leader. And what I mean by that is quit and go get a better leader.
Yeah.
You got to. We can do that. Leaders can fire us, but we can fire the leader too. It's called go find a new leader, and it could be
There
in the
you go.
same company, different department, or a different company, or you can start your own business. But we're suffering from leadership malpractice all over this earth.
Yeah, definitely. And your comment makes me think of our friend Jimmy Collins and some things. Yeah, I think we need to do another episode, Matt, because I think we got a lot more we could talk about. And I tell you, my audience is obviously resonating with it, and I appreciate that. Everyone, I encourage you. Macks, he's one of the most genuine people I know. And I was quite impressed that I called him. He didn't know me from anybody. And rather than, say being nice and all that, Mac said, okay, let's get together. And Mac and Rhea drove to not far from my home, and we had a great conversation. And so reach out to Mac. He's the real deal. Get his books. Okay. There's a lot of wisdom in there to be had. And it's great as it's in Mack's style, and Mack's got a great style that is valuable. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate you being here today. You're a great audience, and you make the difference for the podcast. Mack and I just around telling stories,
That's
and
about
so
it.
thanks for being here, and we'll see you all next Monday at 8:00 as usual. And you can get a hold of Mack through LinkedIn. And if you can't figure out how to get a hold of him, I'll connect you to Mack. And so God bless you guys. Have a great week. And we will see you next week on the Wisdom Seeker podcast.
Thank you,
Take
Kevin.
care.